Welcome to Global Learn Day. My name is Terrence R. Redding. I'm an educator affiliated with the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Global Education, and it's my pleasure to speak with you today about global learning and Global Learn Day. I've been talking about where we came from, and I've been using the framework of tools, Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age to talk about how man has made progress from 2.4 million years ago when we started using tools for the first time, about 200,000 years ago as modern man using fire for the first time, push that back to maybe 350,000 years if you're not interested in it being modern man. But the emergence of agriculture and the building of communities, the establishing of cultural identity, all of these things have happened in the last 10 to 12,000 years at the end of the last ice age, when we moved from the Stone Age into a period of agriculture, when the planet warmed dramatically, when ice sheets of more than 2 miles thick melted, when the sea level rose over 400 feet, flooding all of the coastal areas that possibly we had occupied at one time, and we emerged still in the Stone Age from the last ice age and shifted from being primarily hunter-gatherers to an agricultural foundation for our subsistence, which made us more stable in terms of staying in one place and managing crops, domesticating animals, and then working with more sophisticated tools until we learned how to smelt copper and mix it with tin to create bronze, a very hard metal that greatly improved our ability to manufacture tools, both for agriculture and for war. That Bronze Age, the beginning of the agricultural age, began about 5,000 years ago. So coming out of the last ice age, we went through anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 years of agriculture using primarily wood and bone and stone tools until we developed bronze tools. And the Bronze Age lasted from about 3,000 to 1,000 BC, or about a 2,000 year period of time. And then we learned how to smelt and make iron tools. Iron is much more plentiful than copper. And as a result, we could mass produce tools for agriculture and tools for war. And the proliferation of tools spread, not uniformly, not at one time, but spread over time, over a 2,000 or 3,000 year period of time, until all of the Asian and Western world was using iron tools primarily. You could still find pockets of Stone Age people using slash and burn or using hunting and gathering, but predominantly the West had turned towards the Iron Age. When the Europeans got to the Americas, the American Indians in North and Central and South America, we think of them as, in that colorful terminology of cowboys and Indians and the Plains Indians, as Indians on horseback moving across the plains, but that wasn't the case. Primarily, the Native Americans were agricultural. They were in that agricultural period, Stone Age period, prior to the Bronze Age. Indeed, the only Native Americans that had reached the Bronze Age were the Incas in the Andes, the last of the Andean civilizations. They had reached the Bronze Age. All others had been able to work with metal, copper, gold, primarily for jewelry, for ornament, but not from a tool-making point of view, not from it being hard enough to replace stone tools. And so that's the world we found ourselves in when the Americas were settled by the Europeans. Today, things are changing dramatically. And this is why it is so important that people engage in Global Learn Day and think about the planet as being occupied by just one people, the human race, rather than taking our cultural biases and having conflict that is structurally in our minds, not biologically in our nature. That's part of the importance of Global Learn Day. To embrace mankind's learning, our ability to acquire knowledge, develop skills, affect our environment, and create a situation in which mankind is lifted up through his hard work and stewardship over the planet to improve the human condition, whether it's from food supply, water supply, shelter, or security. And today, I would argue that it's critically important that we shed the idea of being separate and different. Today, it's important that we embrace the notion of one planet, one people, that we are more alike than we are dissimilar. I mentioned in one of the earlier videos about my own DNA and genetic history. I was surprised to discover, maybe I shouldn't have been, some of you listening to this may have guessed this, but I'm about 4% Neanderthal, caveman. Kind of interesting because the notion of what the Neanderthal was like is also evolving and now is much more favorable than the original impression of what the Neanderthal was like. But the other part of my DNA has to do with coming out of East Africa. And I imagine if we look at the DNA of all people, we will discover that as we go back in time, that 250,000 years, that we share common ancestors, that we are all related, that we are all part of a human family, that we are all engaged in the human condition of improving the human race. And so I would invite you to take a look at where you are, take a look at the people that were there before you, and learn what you can about them, and then embrace the notion that it's just one planet, it's but one people. And let's engage in Global Learn Day and engage in a celebration of mankind's learning. Let's celebrate the first teacher. Let's celebrate the first school. Let's celebrate the first educational institution. Let's celebrate the first man to walk the land upon which we now stand. I'm reminded of a story that has been passed down through my family and through my military experience. I found myself in the Army, in the field artillery, in the area of target acquisition, working at the Target Acquisition Department at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then later studying at the University of Oklahoma and becoming somewhat engaged in historiography and the development of mankind's history. And I came across a piece of information that kind of surprised me. My father was born within about 10 miles of the Devil's Tower, the first national monument in the United States in northeastern Wyoming. You could say he was born within the shadow of the Devil's Tower. And the Devil's Tower has an interesting Indian story associated with some Indian maidens who were disturbed by a large bear, and they climbed up on top of this rock. And the bear tried to get them and clawed at the side of this rock, leaving its claw marks, creating what we now know as the Devil's Tower. Well, that story, that piece of information, was passed to us by ICO. ICO was the last U.S. Army Indian scout at Fort Sill, and he told a great many of these Indian lore, Indian stories about the area that he came from, which was the area of Wyoming and the Black Hills of Wyoming. And one of the stories that he told that has struck me as very interesting is in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, there's a medicine wheel. It's a circle of stone, much like the Stonehenge that is so famous in the British Isles. And this has been referred to as the Stonehenge of the Americas, but it's much, much smaller than that. But it's significant in that it has an astronomical base. There's a way of determining the seasons based on light striking and landing across this circle of stone. And it used to have large lodge poles and things like that associated with it. It used to be a much, much bigger structure. But ICO in describing Medicine Wheel in the Bighorn Mountains, made a point of saying that his people did not create it. That when they arrived in the Bighorn Mountains, Medicine Wheel was already there. And that it had been built by a prior people, a more ancient people, who had lived in that area and who ICO and his group never met, but who left behind the artifact of Medicine Wheel. And so I would guess worldwide, as we take a hard look at where we live, we will find out that there's a lot of interesting things to learn, a lot of knowledge to gain, a lot of understanding to experience, as we embrace the notion of one planet, one people, and move forward, trying to acquire the knowledge necessary, looking for the genius wherever it may come from, that ultimately will allow us to survive an extinction level event. Because we know from time to time our planet is subject to an extinction level event, whether that's a volcano or a large rock striking us from outer space, or a changing climate with an oncoming ice age or global warming, whatever it happens to be. We need to be knowledgeable enough to deal with the circumstances that we will meet in our future. And the genius to meet those circumstances can come from anywhere, from anyone, from any one group of people. So let's embrace knowledge, let's embrace learning, let's celebrate Global Learn Day. I encourage you to participate in your local school, in your business, in your community. Celebrate the teachers, celebrate the educators, celebrate the acquisition and distribution of knowledge planet-wide. Welcome to Global Learn Day. Thank you. This has been Terrence R. Redding, an educator associated with the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Global Education. I'll see you on Global Learn Day.